So the one of the key questions about Mishpatim is the continuum. In other words, you have the Aseret HaDibros, and then you have that brief parsha at the end of Yisro, which seems, a side of Malos on Mizbechi, about Avodah Zarah, the Sas and Eti should not make with me, all Avodah Zarah. Then you have, of course, Parshas Mishpatim. Then we go back, of course, to the continuation of the Aseret HaDibros, the bris, the covenant that's made, right? So a lot of the Meforshim discuss how it fits together, and what why it is, of course, that the Mishpatim are inserted in this place. The Ibn Ezra, if you look at the first Ibn Ezra on the Parsha, if you're following inside, if not, don't worry. The very first Ibn Ezra, so he explains it like this. He says the key really is the Avodah Zarah connection, the concept of the Bnei Yisrael needing to understand fundamentally what it means, what Anochi Hashem Elokecha means. And he says, Achas she'omru Yisrael Moshe, daber ito imanu. After Hashem said to Moshe, you speak to us. Omar Hashem Moshe begishto Rafel. Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu when he approached the thick cloud, Kosam al Bnei Yisrael. So you shall say to Bnei Yisrael, V'hochel hazeh al Elohei Zahav. Right? He began to warn them about Avodah Zarah. This is at that parsha at the end, immediately after the Aseret HaDibros, right? That is to emphasize the idea of Avodah Zarah is reinforced. And that when he would descend from the mountain, there would be that covenant that would be made with them, that he would be the only one, that they would have a unique connection with him alone. And that is, of course, the bris at the end of the parsha. Now, he taught him at this juncture the mishpatim and the mitzvahs. It was a test. If they will accept these, then he will make the covenant with them. And at the end comes the parsha of, I'm going to send this malach before. We might come back to that briefly later on, the end of this week's parsha. The ikara parsha, this is the key point, the primary focus of the parsha, therefore, is lahashmid avodas gilulim me'artzom v'hachnasom shom, right? That they should destroy Avodah Zarah when they entered Eretz Yisrael. And that's what Moshe explained. He goes on to say, Moshe explained to them, Lifnei Kros HaBris, before the covenant, and this is how it is. And therefore what you have, he says, is you have the Tchilas HaParsha, Sh'liyasvus Hashem Elohim Achem. What I think he's saying is that you've really got to view Parshas Mishpatim together with the end of Yisro. It's like the end of Yisro, Shvi of Yisro, which talks about Sasun Eti Elei Hizov. You have to look at as a parallel with the end of Mishpatim, where if you look at the end of Mishpatim before the bris, once again Avodah Zarah is emphasized, right, in significant detail. After all the mitzvahs, after the Mishpatim, after the Yom Tovim, you've got there again, Lo Sishtachav El Elohehem, V'lo Sa'avdeim, V'lo Sa'aseh K'ma'aseim, don't bow down to their idols, destroy them. It's re-emphasized. So there's this parallel between the two. Okay, so he links the two together. That's the Ibn Ezra. Now, the key question, therefore, I think, on the Ibn Ezra is, how do the Mishpatim achieve this? Why are the Mishpatim, these specific, which of course are mainly civil law, why is that the test? That's the Ibn Ezra's understanding. There's a test here. So what's that? If you'll accept this, then I know, then Hashem says, then I know I can make the covenant with you, the bris, right? So why is it that it's the Mishpatim themselves that are the test? And for that, I think we can understand something vital here from the Ramban. So if you go to the Ramban, the very first Ramban on the Parsha, just the first bit of it, the Ramban says like this, that Hashem wanted to put the Mishpatim first, Ki kasher hoya ba'aseres hadibros, hadibor rishon b'yedis Hashem. Just like it was with the Aseres hadibros, the first dibur is the Yedias Hashem. Right? Anochi Hashem Elokecha, knowledge of Hashem. V'hasheni be'isra avodah zarah. The second one is the isra avodah zarah. Chazav tzivos Moshe kosem al bnei Yisrael tzem risan kimen ashroit b'ati mochem shetasiram ato oid sheyitnu libom mashiro v'zor mitzvah eila shetzivisem. Okay, he says that there's a parallel between the first of the Aseret HaDibros and the beginning of the parsha immediately after the Aseret HaDibros, because what does it say? Atem re'isem. You saw, this is immediately after the Aseret HaDibros, you saw that I spoke to you min hashamayim, meaning me, only me, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, right? And then And then, so he says, Atemar Isemit corresponds to the Dibur of Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Lo Sasur Iti is connected Lo Yelecha. Obviously, you shall have no gods before me, right? Aside from me, right? So this is Lo Yelecha Lemechere. Lahashlim Inyan Avodah Zarah, to complete the idea of Avodah Zarah. Now, okay, fine. What does Mishpatim do? Ve'ela Mishpatim connected Lo Sachmod. He jumps. Mishpatim corresponds to Lo Sachmod. Now, why does the Mishpatim correspond to Lo Sachmod? Lo Sachmod means do not desire, do not covet. Do not covet people's things, right? Etc. So he says like this, beautiful words. Listen to this, the Ramban. Ki im lo yeda ha'odam, lo yada ha'odam mishpat habayis soda u'shar moment. If a person doesn't properly understand, says the Ramban, the rules around houses, around fields, around property, yachsho, he will think, shehu shaloi, anything is his. I can take whatever I want. There's no real boundaries. There's no real rules. And he will desire it and take it for himself. Therefore it says, place it before them, mishpatim yesharim, upright statutes, laws, civil law, they should conduct it amongst themselves, and they should not desire what is not theirs by law. And then he goes on to explain how there's parallels also later on in this parsha, obviously to Ritzicha, you have adultery, all these things, they appear in various songs. There are other parallels to the Aseret Dibros in Mishpatim. But beautiful words of Ramban. What is the Ramban saying? Ramban is saying like this. The lo sachmod means not to want other people's things. The only way and the only real way to understand and to fulfill those sachmod, because of course, a lot of the Mefarshim talk about this, it's incredibly difficult. It's a thought process. It's in the mind, right? That's the challenge with the sachmod, right? Only way is to really understand the boundaries of law in terms of civil law, property, what's mine, what's yours, what's mine, rules around fields, animals, property. It's the only way is to learn Bava properly, effectively, which is Parshas Mishpatim. Now, why do I think this has to do with Ibn Ezra? Because what we see from the Ramban is to come close to Hashem, to have real emunah, we need to understand boundaries. We need to understand what is within my realm and what is not. That's the principle. That's the key idea. Paganism, right? Avodah Zarah, in its original form and even in its current form where it exists, is the antithesis of this. Why? Because the whole idea, the concept of Avodah Zarah, is that you can change, the idol, if you like, to fit me. Can bribe the Avodah Zarah with something and twist it to what I want. That I'm really in control. That's really, that's really the essence of the idea, right? That's of course the incredible and hugely important distinction between the concept of a korban, which is for me to draw near to Hashem. It's not a bribery, right? That was idolatry, right? The idea of you can bribe the idol to do something for you. Obviously it's the Havdil Elef Havdalas. It's a complete distinction in every possible way. So therefore we can suggest that this is why the Mishpatim are the test of the covenant of the bris. Hashem says, how do I know that you are really devoted to me, that you are really forsaking the whole idea of Avodah Zarah? Through keeping the Mishpatim. Because if you keep the Mishpatim and you understand the notion of boundaries properly between people, so that you don't want someone else's property, because there are boundaries and there are rules, and it's not that I can take and get whatever I want, then you'll also understand that I'm in complete control. You understand your relationship, what our relationship with Hashem is meant to be. The idea that there are clear divisions, there are clear boundaries, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in control, and that we do not have that control ourselves, that He is governing our lives. So this, I think, is a parallel. That's why the Mishpatim, without them and without understanding boundaries between people, it's impossible to understand our relationship correctly with Hashem. I think that's what perhaps what the Ramban can help us understand the avodas, help us understand what the Ibn Ezra is getting at, and the whole continuum of the parsha. Now, last year we spent some time, and the great thing is it's available on YouTube if you want to catch up last year's as well. It's all there on the Toras Chaim YouTube advert. Still there. Now, but last year we spent time looking at individual and specific aspects of the Mishpatim. And this year I'd like to spend the rest of the share on the end of the Parsha and exactly understanding some key points there. So if you turn to Perek Chof Gimel Pasuk Chof Aleph, this is really just necessary to understand basic pshat because it's very difficult. The identity of this malach, right? Beginning of Shishi, yeah? Hinei onochi sholeach maloch lefonecha. Who is the malach, right? Who is the malach? The Mefarshim really struggle with this. Rashi says that the malach, Rabbi Seino Omru ze metatron, sheshmo kashem Rabbi. The metatron is gematria shakai shin dalad yud. This was a particular malach that was sent in front of them. What's the issue with the parsha? The struggle is what does Moshe Rabbeinu say in Parshas Kisisa? Right? Only you lead us. Yeah, that's his whole tefillah to Hashem. Yeah, I only want you to lead us, not a malach. So what does it mean here when it says Hinei Anochi Shalach? This is even before the Egel HaZahav, right? This is even before the Egel HaZahav, and Hashem is saying, send them up. So there are other Mefarshim who learn differently. Other Mefarshim, I think, learn that it refers to when they. Some say it was only while they were in the midbar, but not when they entered Eretz Yisrael. There are all different Mefarshim here. I mean, for example, the Ibn Ezra here says, he says the malach is the Sefer Torah. Some say it's the Aron Habris. That's the messenger. The point is that a malach we translate as an angel, but that's not necessarily an accurate translation. There are different shatim. Now, Rav Hirsch says that the malach here can be understood as Moshe Rabbeinu. We can understand malach, he says, in a general sense, but it can also refer to Moshe Rabbeinu himself. In other words, Hinei Anochi Sholech Malach Lefonecha, the malach is the messenger, right? Moshe himself, who is being sent before you in order to make sure that you do the right thing. He brings we have the same thing in Bamidbar, where it says Vayishlach Maloch Vayotzinu Mitzrayim. He sent a malach and took us out of Mitzrayim. It would be a contradiction to the Haggadah, right? Lo yalei malach. So Chazal explain what is the malach. The malach is Moshe Rabbeinu. He's the agent of Hashem to take us out of Mitzrayim in that way. But then, of course, the key in that parsha, in the psukim here, is the idea that is for us to understand that if you understand the pasuk according to referring to Moshe Rabbeinu, to guard you on the way, to bring you, Hashem said, the place that I have prepared. Do not make the mistake in thinking that he is the one running things, because he is not. He is the malach. He is the agent. But what we see overall here, therefore, is that, and this is now looking forward into the rest of the parsha from Shishi to the end, is there are three identifiable groups or individuals, right? There's Moshe Rabbeinu himself, one level, right? Then you have the Zakanim, Nadav and Avihu. Come back to them in a second. And the third, and perhaps most mysterious group of all that is identified in this last part of the parsha, is the Na'arei B'nai Yisrael, the youngsters, right? And who are they, right? You look at the parsha, just again, this is that Parsha Mishpatim, one of those parshas where, you never get to Shishi. But I mean, there's more Rashi, I think, on Mishpatim than the other Parsha in the Torah. So the chances of getting to Shishi, that's doing very well, is tough. So it's good to learn a bit of Shishi and Shvi. Now, the point is that you have, as I said, Moshe Rabbeinu being described. At least if we learn like that, although it's a bit of a chiddush that pshat. But when Hashem says, Hashem carries on. He says, "I will send my fear before you. It will take time, won't drive them away, etc." And then Perechov Dalad, you have like this. You've got Vel Moshe Omar to Moshe. He says, and Rashi says clearly, this parsha Perechov Dalad Pasuk Aleph. This was said before the Aseres HaDibros on the 4th of Sivan. Vel Moshe Omar Alei El Hashem. Atov Aaron Nodov Aviv V'Shivim Meziknei Yisrael V'Shtachavisa Merochik. And you shall go up the mountain, and the 70 of the Ziknei Yisrael, and you shall bow down from a distance away. Okay, and then you see clearly the separations in levels. V'nigash Moshe levado el Hashem. Moshe goes himself. V'heim lo yigoshu. They did not go near. They did not go as far as he did. V'ham lo yale imay. And the people did not go with him. And then Moshe comes and tells the people, "Es divrei Hashem," and then they answer, "Kol hadvarim asher divrei Hashem na'aseh," we will do. Then Moshe writes the divrei Hashem, right? Pasuk Daled, "Vayishkem b'boker," and he builds him his mizbeach tachas ahar. And then it says he sets up shteim esrei matzeva l'shnei masor shiftei Yisrael, 12 stones. I'll come back to that in a second. What are these 12 stones? And finally, vayishlach es narei b'nei Yisrael vayalu olos. He sends the Nare B'nai Yisrael, the youngsters, the Bechor. Rashi says that the Bechoros, but it's a bit mysterious. Nare is, youngsters, it's youth. Doesn't specifically say Bechoros. And if it is the Bechoros, if it is the firstborn, the obvious question is, well, they're not necessarily Nare. You can have a Bechor who's 85 years old. He's still a Bechor, right? So it's what does it mean, Nare? You understand the difficulty here. These are the challenges. And anyway, they bring the Korbanos. And then Moshe performs the bris. Half the blood, the blood is split, and half is in the bowl, and it placed in the bowls, and half is on the mizbeach. He reads this Sefer HaBris from Bereshis until Matan Torah, Rashi says, and then he takes the blood, he sprinkles on the people, and then you have Vayal Moshe Posuk Tes. You'll see why this is all important to understand it, just to go through the psukim. Moshe went up, and Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu, V'shivim Mizik in Yisrael, and they saw Vayiru Es Elokei Yisrael, V'sachas Raglov Kamase Libnas Hasaper Rechetza Hashemayim L'Torah. This very mysterious posuk that they saw in some way Hashem, whatever that means. This is very difficult to understand. They saw some aspect of a revelation of Hashem's presence, and beneath his feet was the image Kamaisa, or a structure of some sort of a brick of sapphire, and like the appearance of the heavens in its purity. And then it says, to the Atzile B'nai Yisrael, Rashi says that now is Nadav and Avihu and the Zekanim. That's what it means, Atzile. Atzile is like those who, like it says, Vayotzel min haruach, set aside from the spirit, right? So it's those who received some aspect of the light of the Shekhinah, of the revelation, exactly. And they saw Hashem, and yet they ate and drank. Okay, and then the end of the parsha is Hashem telling Moshe Rabbeinu, you come up to the mountain, and I will give you the Luchos Even and the Torah, the Mitzvah, etc., etc. And he does, and he tells the kingdom again, you wait here. They're not the same as him. Moshe goes up by himself, and he stays there 40 days. That is the end of the parsha. That is the end of the parsha. Now, there's several really critical things I like to bring out here. Number one is, what is the distinction between Moshe Rabbeinu and the Zekanim? And it seems that the critical distinction, this is brought out by the Ibn Ezra, and I'm sure others as well, the critical distinction is expressed in terms of the attitude and what they do with regards to eating and drinking. There's a very famous Ibn Ezra at the end of the parasha, the very last Ibn Ezra, where he says, this is the most wondrous and astonishing thing, that Moshe Rabbeinu, lechem lo achalti ma'im lo shalsisi. He didn't eat and he didn't drink all 40 days and 40 nights. Now, the immediate sort of opposite to that is vayochlu vayishtu, right? They saw the Shekhinah, vayochlu vayishtu, not the Zekanim, did eat and drink. Says the Ibn Ezra there on Pasuk Yud Aleph. What did they eat? It wasn't that they ate just because they wanted to eat and drink. What vayochlu zivchei shlomim shazavchu na'areim. They ate the shlomim, the korbanos. They were supposed to eat in that way, it seems, right? They weren't eating a mitzvah, for a mitzvah. Vayishtu b'simcha, they drank because of the simcha of what was going on. Rabbi Yehuda Alevi says, Ibn Ezra, he quotes the Kuzari, who says, Ki tam vayochlu, when it says they ate, ki hutzruchu sheyochlu, they needed to eat. Afal pi shenenu miziv hashchina, even though they benefited from the Shekhinah. Moshe. So it mentions it because of Moshe, because Moshe was 40 nights without eating and drinking. So he didn't eat or drink, but they needed to eat and drink because they were the korbanos, and there was the simcha of the mitzvah. So the question, therefore, with the Zekanim is obvious. If it was the case that they were supposed to eat and drink, why were they punished? The Zekanim were punished, right? Okay, it says that they were. Rashi brings it. Where does Rashi bring it? I think Rashi brings it here, doesn't he? Where does he bring it here? Whether Rashi brings it here, that's right. Rashi brings on Pasuk Yudalef, right? They were looked in an inappropriate way with a heart that was too full, too proud. That's the Medrash Tanchuma, right? Says Chaim Shmulevitz, why is it that they were judged in this way to have been acting inappropriately? What did they do wrong? All they did was eat and drink the korbanos, what they were supposed to do. What did they do wrong? So he says like this, the point of what happened to the Zakenim is, even though it was what he calls a Gashmius Shel Mitzvah, the physical existence that they were having through this eating and drinking was for a mitzvah purpose. And he brings the Ramban, who explains the similar way it sounds like to the Ibn Ezra. So he says, even so, Mikanat Olomet, he says, from here you learn that people, those who come close to Hashem, need to be exceptionally careful. Afilu dover, he says, mitzvah rabba. For others, it might be a great mitzvah. We know it's a mitzvah to make a suda. You finish something, a masechta, Torah, you make a suda. When we finish the Torah, make a suda, right? Everything is halacha mitzvah. It can turn into a sin so easily. Great people like Nadav and Avihu and the Zakenim, because they had arisen above the level of ordinary people, and they had put themselves within the frame of those who were able in some way to glimpse the Shekhinah, right? To see and to come so close to that spiritual level, that level of spirituality. And therefore, they already were on a totally different plane, and they were judged in a much stricter way. Because since they had arisen to that level to be ne'enim as if a Shekhinah, they should have rejoiced without eating and drinking. And there is a paradox. There is a paradox in the sense that they were eating and drinking because they were supposed to. But even so, it didn't work. It didn't match. Somehow, maybe, perhaps they should have eaten at a different time, a different stage, maybe not then. Whatever exactly, there is a difficulty. I think we can acknowledge the paradox here. But what he's trying to say is, he says, if a person, the higher a person is, the higher madrega a person reaches, the more we understand how the tiniest thing can shake them off course. It's a very, very critical message. It's not that they were, we read it simplistically as if, how could they do that? They could just eat and drink. No, they were even eating and drinking for a mitzvah, but it wasn't quite right. It didn't quite work. They couldn't have, perhaps they should not have then tried to expose themselves to the Shekhinah in that way if they needed to. We don't, however we understand it. But that was the difference between them and Moshe Rabbeinu in this way. Now, what about the third and perhaps most puzzling of all, which is the Na'arei, right? So who are these Na'arei? Where is it? Vayishlach Na'arei b'nei Yisrael, Pasuk Hey. So Rav Hirsch here has a beautiful, beautiful piece. He says like this: Shtei Mesrei Matzeva. Moshe Rabbeinu, Rashi doesn't explain, I think, what they were for. Pasuk Dalet, he writes the words of Hashem, and he builds a Mizbeach, and he sets up 12 stones, and they correspond to the 12 Shiftei Yisrael. Asks Rav Hirsch, why do you need the 12 Shvatim be represented by stones? The 12 Shvatim are all there. They're there in person. Why do they need to be represented by stones? What is going on here? And he says, the idea of the 12 stones was not to represent the 12 Shvatim that are present at that moment at the foot of Har Sinai. These stones represent the future. Evan is something found, is always the most solid thing that exists. I mentioned before, right? That's why you use an Evan as a matzeva, an Evan, right? It represents permanence. Evan is an acronym for Av Ben Neched. This is a father, son, grandson. The idea that there's a continuum, it's always there. This is the permanence. So what is an Evan? The stones represent the future of Klal Yisrael, the eternal Klal Yisrael. As he quotes the pasuk in Dvarim, Eis Asher Yeshno Poi, Ve'eis Asher Einenu Poi. It's a beautiful parallel. At the end, in Sefer Dvarim, right? What does Moshe Rabbeinu say? Atem nitzovim hayom kulchem. You're all here today, and the bris, the covenant, is with those who are here and those who are not here, those who are yet to be born. Says Rav Hirsch, that is also what was taking place here. Moshe Rabbeinu builds this Mizbeach, he puts the stones up, because he doesn't just look at the people in front of him. He sets up 12 stones to represent the fact that this event that was transpiring now is an event which has the permanence and the presence of every other member, every member of Klal Yisrael for Doros, all future generations, right? That's what the stones represent. And that's the symbolism of the 12 stones. He says, he brings a proof actually, in a way, from Sefer Malachim. with Malachim, when it comes to, in Sif Malachim, when it comes to Eliyahu Novi, when Eliyahu Novi wants to, repair all the damage, with the Navi Habal, the famous, duel as such with the Navim of the Baal, it says there that Eliyahu Novi takes 12 stones corresponding to the names of the Shivtei Yisrael, and saying, and it says that to whom the word of Hashem had come, saying, Yisrael shall be your name. It specifically refers to the mission of Yisrael, and he sets up 12 stones, the same thing. Why? Because there, again, the minority were wavering. The people weren't sure, who should we go? Are we still connected? It was all so, everything was weak, and it wasn't sure which way it would go. The majority had been swayed by the Avodah Zarah, by the Navi Habal, okay? But what Eliyahu Novi does is he doesn't just talk and look at the people in front of him who are swaying, they're not sure how they'll be committed. He sets up the 12 stones as if to say, this is about the permanence, the future of Klal Yisrael, not just the people here, this is about the future, which will never, never be lost. Again, like Moshe Rabbeinu here, he's not just looking at the here and now, he's looking at the future. Therefore, says Rav Hirsch, next pasuk, Vayishlach es Narei b'nei Yisrael. He sends the Narei b'nei Yisrael because they are the bearers of the future. It's a beautiful pshat. He sends them. Vayishlach es Narei b'nei Yisrael. He sends the bearers of the future, the youth, and they bring up olos. Olos, he says, represent total commitment. That's what olah is, a burnt offering, completely burnt. It goes, total spirituality, but also zivchei shlomim. Shlomim represents simcha. They're eaten by the owners in simcha, the two of them together. And they bring these together in the idea that they have both the simcha, they representing the idea that they can eat from the beauty of and the benefit and everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us in this world, while striving for tremendous spirituality, the olas, the burnt offerings. There is one final idea that connects to this that I want to share with you beautifully, and that is this Ma'aseh Livnas HaSaper. Beautiful idea. What is the Ma'aseh Livnas HaSaper? So we know Rashi says that this was stone from Chazal. This was the Hiyah Solofono B'Shas HaShibud, right? Yeah, the bricks. Yeah, the Pasuk Yud, yeah? Right, Rashi says that was in front of him at the time of the slavery, to remember the pain of Klal Yisrael. They were enslaved with these bricks, okay? But it was like the purity of heaven when they were redeemed. The Oznaim LaTorah asks, why were they being shown this now? You would think that they needed that comfort when they were being enslaved. B'Shas HaShibud, that's when they should be shown, right? The fact that there was, Hashem was there, right? Hashem was there with them at the time of slavery. Right, at the time of maybe at the snare, the bush. He says like this, Oznaim LaTorah says that this vision was to explain to Bnei Yisrael why did Hashem do this to Am Yisrael, to hand them over to the Mitzrayim. Hashem showed them through this vision that the enslavement that they had was something which, even though they found it difficult to understand now, the challenges, the difficulty, the pain of the shibud, ultimately, it was a process they needed to go through so that they would be purified eventually. So it was specifically one that they could understand perhaps now. They could understand that after they'd achieved the tachlis, the point, they'd come now to Har Sinai, they saw now that what they thought was at the feet of the Shekhinah was a brick of cement. It wasn't really a brick of cement. It was Livnas HaSaper. It's the same brick. The brick that they thought was a brick of mud brick was actually a brick of sapphire, because they saw the process they'd gone through and they'd become a nation as a result. And Baruch Mordechai Ezrachi says on this, or connected to this idea, when we teach our children, we try and support our children, we need to be there for them through their challenges and successes. We need them to understand in the same way that the brick is the same brick. It's the brick of shibud, and it's also the same brick which can be a brick of sapphire. And it's not about ignoring the difficult times. It's about understanding that the difficult times sometimes are part of a process which may be immensely difficult to understand at times, but ultimately the same brick becomes a brick of sapphire. Now, he doesn't mention Rav Hirsch's pshat, but I think that fits so beautifully with the idea that it's the Narei b'nei Yisrael. The focus, the center stage here, Matan Torah, when the bris is made, it's made not just with the people here, but it's made with the future generations. El Nare B'nai Yisrael. He tends, Moshe Rabbeinu makes this, he sets up the 12 stones, the future of Klal Yisrael, and he sends, he's like Shlachas Nare, tends them forward. He sends the Nare B'nai Yisrael. You are the ones to represent us. And how do they go forward? They hold the brick. And the brick, or not hold the brick, they see this vision of the brick, right? And the brick is both the mud brick and it's also the brick of sapphire. It's also the brick of joy. It can be both things together. And that's a very, very powerful, I think, and beautiful message we can hopefully take and apply in our own lives. Okay. Have a very good Shabbos.
Shkoyach.
Very good Shabbos.